There may be no elections in 2027. Welcome to Politically Connected. This is part of our series on electoral justice. And over the next few episodes, I will present to you a hypothesis that in Kenya, we do not have elections, we do voting. Barely. To contextualize our thinking and to kick us off, I will begin with three quotes from revolutionaries in history. The first, Frederick Douglass, an American abolitionist and political thinker. He stated that power concedes nothing without demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. He said this during an emancipation address, arguing that citizens themselves set the ceiling on oppression. The second quote is by an African giant, Thomas Sankara, during a rally in Ouagadougou. He said, "Our revolution is not the triumph of violent action or the result of riots and fires. It is a product of clear, serene thought that examines the past, illuminates the present, and projects itself into the future. The primary weapon of this revolution is the awakening of consciousness. A people that is enlightened and knows what it wants is invincible." This was on civic enlightenment and as the cornerstone of real change. He said these words in 1984. The third quote is from a Cuban political thinker, writer, and revolutionary. His name, Jose Marti. And he said these words, wrote them in an essay in 1891, and the essay was titled Our America, warning Latin Americans against political apathy. He wrote that men go to battle, give up their lives without ever understanding why. The entire history of progress shows that all concessions come from below. The powers of the earth understand nothing but the language of force. Our weapons, however, are our votes, our voices, our organized will. If we sleep, we shall be enslaved. I will go back to my opening line. There may be no elections in 2027, and you and I, all of us together, are to blame. In big part, it is because as a Kenyan family, we are plagued with an almost chronic disease of being half citizens. Nusu raia. What do I mean by this? I mean, as Kenyan citizens, we are very good, excellent at knowing, naming, claiming, and demanding our rights. Haki yetu. But we are painfully slow to recognize our duties and obligations as citizens. Yani, jukumu letu. And yet, there can be no rights without obligations. Blaming and pointing fingers at our leaders has become second nature. Complaining has become a national sport, and unfortunately, even a blood sport. I say a blood sport because impressionable young lives are being lost, propelling their youthful bodies full of life and pregnant with promise to the front lines, in the mistaken belief that we are all in this together. As we cheer on, most of us, by doom scrolling on timelines and status updates, we are not in this together. Maybe I've offended you, stepped on a nerve, and I can empathize with why that might be offensive. But riddle me this. How many of us other than the friends and loved ones of the dearly departed, can remember the names of the lives that were lost in last year's protests? Do you remember how many they were? Can you name 5? Okay. Can you say what they died for? Let us pause there for a moment of silence. What am I driving at? I am not speaking out against the right to peaceably protest, picket, demonstrate, and present petitions to public authorities. And neither am I saying that we should all put our phones down and go out and protest. What am I in fact saying? It is this: we are responsible for this mess. We are responsible for the lives lost, for the corruption, for the dysfunction, and the corrosion of the democratic fabric of this country. The center cannot hold. Things are falling apart, and we are all to blame. How dare I say such a thing? I dare say so because we have conveniently changed the spirit of the social contract that requires all of us as citizens to be accountable as signatories to that contract. That social contract, which is the Constitution, which demands at Article 3 that we must all defend and protect the Constitution. But we have somehow changed the meaning of that article to read that we have a duty to blame our politicians and elected leaders. But if we must blame them, then we cannot run away from the mirror because we put them there. And if they rigged themselves in, we allowed it and enabled it, either by aiding it or, more importantly, by neglecting to stop it. If they bribed their way in, people did not come from Malawi or Kazakhstan to receive those bribes. Nisisi too. If our problems rise and fall to the standard of our leadership, we cannot run away from the inconvenient truth that our leadership is a reflection of who we are. Do not misunderstand us. We are not inviting you and us to shelve our righteous rage and indignation. This too is necessary and has its rightful place. Even so, for us to have the moral authority to hold our leaders accountable, then we too must hold our duties sacred. And one of the most sacred duties we have is diligence and vigilance and active participation in the process of deciding who among us will represent us in elected office as well as in public service at large. And that, my friends, cannot be an exercise in blind euphoria and political dancing and razzmatazz every 5 years. Furthermore, we are also saying that it is not enough to say you have registered to vote and to stand in a line, put a tick or an X mark on 6 pieces of paper like a multiple choice exam, place it in a box, and then go home to watch TV or to the nearest bar to debate who will win, and to then say, you have done your national duty. That, my friends, is voting as an activity. That is not elections. Our hypothesis here at Politically Connected is that in Kenya, we do not have elections. We do voting. Barely. Allow us to elaborate a little. What are we saying? We are saying that for many of us, elections have been reduced to the single day we cast our votes. But the fact is, an election covers the constitutional processes and procedures spelled out in the Constitution and spelled out in our electoral laws, including the Elections Act, the IEBC Act, the Electoral Offences Act, and the many regulations underpinning these. All these contain many steps, requirements, and safeguards that must be in place long before the day of voting. And because the Constitution requires that we must all defend it, including the laws that fall under that Constitution, vigilance demands that we must be diligent concerning all these things. Believe it or not, hapo ndo game huchezwa. As we speak, the fact is the 2027 elections have already kicked off in earnest. Allow me to rephrase. If we have elections in 2027, they have already begun. For emphasis, voting is what we do when we wake up early, queue in long lines, thumb through the ballot papers and drop them in the ballot boxes. Elections, however, include everything from voter registration, vetting candidates, appointing election officials, the composition of the electoral commission, the procurement of election materials, knowing who is supplying those materials, including the ballot papers and biometric voter kits, cleaning the voter register, securing polling stations, the counting of votes, the resolving of election disputes. The list is long, and we must be there for all of it if we're to hold our duty sacred. In the words of Supreme Court Justice Isaac Lenaola during one of the petitions, he said, "An election is not an event, but a process." And yet, too many of us, almost all of us, treat it like a one-day affair where we focus on one main activity. We put all our energy into the voting, a few inked fingers and social media selfies, but pay little to no attention to the rest of the election process. And then we wonder how we ended up with some of the people we love to hate so much as leaders. And yet, wacha niwaibie siri. They know how to manipulate all those processes. And trust me, they are not lazy. You think that it is just bribing and ballot stuffing. My friends, we are not in the 90s. Let me be as sincere as I can be. Just because you have a low opinion of your leaders does not mean they are not intelligent. One of the cardinal political sins we keep committing is that we keep underestimating them over and over again. And because we underestimate them, we become complacent. When we become complacent, the best we can do is complain or pour out into the streets without a plan. But every time you come out without a plan, they take excellent notes, study your patterns and mannerisms, and become better at suppression and oppressing us. And just like that, we are left with the illusion of a democracy, where we count sending a letter to a police station to notify of a protest as victory. We are settling for crumbs, and yet God designed us for a promised land. Back to the matter at hand. Long before voting day, the battle for electoral justice has already begun. It starts with pre-election integrity, the calm before the storm. This includes cleaning the voter register, vetting candidates, the composition of the IEBC, and the integrity of its infrastructure, including selecting the officials who will run the polls. If any of these are violated before a single vote is cast, the election is already compromised. In past elections, questions have arisen about bloated voter registers, dead voters who mysteriously cast votes, duplicate IDs, or people registered in far-flung areas without their knowledge and no way of getting to the voting booth in good time on voting day. Ahead of 2022, an audit removed hundreds of thousands of anomalous entries, deceased, duplicate, or invalid IDs from the voter roll. It was a good step. But ask yourself, did you even know that was happening? Many Kenyans didn't. And yet a clean register is the foundation of a fair election. Yet it's often only discussed when an election is being disputed in the courts, post fact. Also, perhaps the most critical and yet most overlooked pre-election task is choosing who will referee the game. This includes IEBC commissioners at the top and tens of thousands of temporary staff, returning officers, presiding officers, polling and counting clerks, and even the IT guys managing the results transmission. If we fail to scrutinize who these people are, we may be handing the keys to the election to the highest bidder. Needless to state the obvious, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, IEBC, is supposed to be just that, independent. But as we move towards the next general election, whenever it may be, the High Court, less than 2 weeks ago, nullified President Ruto's gazettement of the new IEBC commissioners, citing a breach of an existing conservatory order issued in May of 2025. With only 2 years to 2027, IEBC remains partially incapacitated, at least in theory, with the courts casting doubts as to the legitimacy of the commissioners. And so we can only wonder whether the IEBC can fully perform vital preparatory tasks like voter registration, boundary delimitation, or technology procurement. All essential prerequisites embedded in the timelines of the election management plan. Yes, there is such a thing, an election management plan. If the core election management functions are delayed or constitutionally violated, the 2027 election may again be staged on shaky legal ground, giving rise to a replay of 2017's nullification drama, or worse, a constitutional crisis. Yet, ironically, most of us seem unaware or even indifferent to these procedural earthquakes brewing behind closed doors. Let us remember that in 2022, the IEBC was split into two camps at the level of the commissioners over the presidential results. 4 commissioners, the Cherera 4, named after Vice Chair Juliana Cherera, publicly disowned the tally announced by the chair, the now late Wafula Chebukati.
As you can see, the four of us, we are here, not at Bomas of Kenya, where the result is going to be announced, because of the opaque nature of how this phase has been handled. We therefore cannot take ownership on the results that is going to be announced.
More than half the commissioners, including the vice chair, termed the process opaque. They even swore affidavits alleging the chair had made unilateral decisions while they were kept in the dark. Let us rewind the tape just a little bit. It's August 2022. The nerve center of the election at Bomas of Kenya. The nation is on the edge, awaiting the presidential results. Suddenly, a press conference erupts outside the hall at a hotel nearby. 4 IEBC commissioners break ranks and declare they cannot support the results about to be announced due to the opaque nature of the tallying process. Despite this, not too long after, IEBC Chair Chebukati goes ahead and declares a winner amid chaos. Agents protesting, fists flying, even chairs thrown. It was a horrifying spectacle. And yet, about a year later, an immediate former US ambassador later said to a conference of governors that it was the most free and fair election in Kenyan history.
I arrived in Kenya days before the August 22 general elections. What I witnessed was nothing short of remarkable. Kenya held what many analysts and commentators say was the freest, fairest, and most credible election in Kenyan history.
But we shall shelve the issue and subject of foreign interference maybe for another episode. Ultimately, what we witnessed was systemic failure. The team entrusted to guard our vote could not stand by the result or the process. The same thing or something similar happened in 2007-2008 when the head of the Electoral Commission, the late Samuel Kivuitu, told us he did not know and could not say who had won definitively. Things went south. Yet, in 2022, somehow, maybe because we have made peace with our elections, or rather our voting being like a popularity contest measured by a thermometer, things didn't boil over, and the political brew was palatable for our taste buds. Even so, what exactly were those dissenting commissioners alleging? In her affidavit, Vice Chair Cherera described how the chair had been running IEBC as a one-man show, shrouded in mystery. She claimed that the chair unilaterally made critical decisions without consulting his fellow commissioners. From secretly printing an extra set of results forms abroad, which was disputed in court, but somehow this form still made it into the election process. He also went as far as reassigning roles of commissioners and senior staff in the middle of tallying. On the day of results, the vice chair said that the chair, the late Wafula Chebukati, summoned commissioners to a boardroom and presented them with a fait accompli, a final presidential tally he had calculated pretty much on his own as far as they could ascertain. They were given no chance to verify or debate those numbers. In Cherera's words, on August 15th, 2022, the chairperson proceeded to announce what he termed as the final results, which had not been tallied and verified by the commission. In other words, one person effectively made the most important decision of the election, which determined the trajectory of this country, and he made that decision behind closed doors. If that doesn't send chills down your spine about pre-election and mid-election integrity, then our hypothesis is sound. Your apathy is part of the problem. When the very referees of the election are playing cloak and dagger amongst themselves, what hope does the ordinary voter have that the process is fair? And remember, the IEBC commissioners are just the tip of the iceberg. Below them, in each constituency, in each polling center, are the returning officers, the presiding officers, and the polling clerks. These are the people who actually handle your vote. They check your ID, mark your name off the register, issue your ballot papers, and help you if the KIMS-KIT, the electronic voter ID gadget, fails. They count your ballots and fill the result forms at the close of polling. Thousands of temporary staff are hired for this mammoth exercise. Over 46,000 polling stations were in operation in 2022, each needing a small army of staff. How are these people recruited? Do you know? The IEBC often advertises for temporary election officials just a couple of months before the polls. University graduates and unemployed youth apply en masse. In theory, they are vetted for neutrality and competence. In theory. In practice, there have long been whispers that local power brokers influence these hires, maybe to slip in a few loyalists here and there. After all, if you are a candidate with less than half noble intentions, wouldn't you want your person manning the ballot or handling the counting table? It's sometimes hard to prove a partisan hiring of polling clerks, but it's something to ponder about. Suspicion is deeply ingrained, and suspicion in elections is poison. Because once doubt creeps in about the impartiality of officials, every result they announce becomes contestable. So, by the time we get to the day of voting, we may already be carrying a mountain of issues. A register that might not be fully clean, candidates of dubious virtue on the ballot, and an election management team that the public may not fully trust.